Welcome to this session on the language preschool pedagogical practices. This is Elena Sada, Twin CS, Two-Way Immersion Network of Catholic Schools, Program Director and Faculty at the Roach Center in Boston College. Thanks to recent research, we have seen a growth in the popularity of preschool because research demonstrates the advantages of early schooling, especially as a way to bridge the gap between different populations. We also have seen through research dual language education as an effective venue toward academic development, bilingualism, sociocultural competence, and many other benefits. We also know that Catholic education is a context for holistic development. So these three settings together lead us to this wonderful reality of dual language preschool in Catholic settings. So what do we seek as educators? We want children's happiness and fulfillment above all. So we facilitate opportunities for holistic development, including linguistic and academic growth. And thus, we affirm identities and celebrate diversity while we position children as valued and knowledgeable members of their community. These are the four objectives that we are seeking today. As you can see, there are common elements, so we will either learn or review or learn to turnkey and practice effectively, depending of the degree of our experience or background knowledge. These four aspects, first, or components: pair learning and play, the use of centers and small groups, inquiry thinking, and the use of home language and translanguaging. And all this to enhance dual language preschool classrooms, enhance language and content learning, also within these settings of dual language. Therefore, in our agenda, we have these four components: pair learning and play, inquiry thinking, centers and small groups, and translanguaging, and the use of home language. We will be using mainly two references or resources. One is the May 2019 edition or issue of the Journal of the NIAC, and a book by Alanis and Agarin called Pair Learning: Strategies for Enhancing Social Competence in Dual Language Classrooms. As a theoretical frame, we're using Vygotsky's sociocultural theory, which implies that learning is social development is foundational, interactions improve social competence, and social competence in turn improves interactions. Our first main topic is pair learning and play. So we know that by following the theoretical framework and premise of social competence, which is foundational in the learning process according to Vygotsky, we know that it refers to the social, emotional, and cognitive skills children need to be effective in their interactions. So some considerations and implications is that it sees social learning as cooperation and collaboration. So it's not an add-on, it's an essential element. It implies many other skills in connection to self-regulation and organization. And it also requires structure and guidance, this more knowledgeable other that Vygotsky refers to in his theory. In connection to play, pair learning, we also have play, which is the main form of social interaction. And it is the ideal, developmentally appropriate context for new learning and for practice and application of new learning. So some considerations are these three. The sociodramatic play is one of the most common forms of play, and it develops social, creative, and cognitive development. Another implication is that centers with familiar situations are the best context for learning. And finally, teachers can choose topics to discuss to develop language and social skills. So as you can see, it's not just play, but is play within a setting of centers and with specific teacher-guided topics. Inquiry thinking is another component that we will discuss later, but here we simply want to connect it with Vygotsky's theory of social interaction learning. So we know from the theory that conceptual and linguistic development happens together. One follows the other one by catching up. So as our cognitive conceptual understanding expands, we seek for the language to explain and conceptualize better, and then the language puts us in a situation where we can actually learn new concepts that are attached to the previous ones, and so on. So we see inquiry thinking in connection to Vygotsky's theory because the new language offers new knowledge, and because one triggers growth in the other. So vocabulary-rich interactions, this play base that's guided by the vocabulary that teachers are introducing, lead to new understandings, and new understandings demand new terms and language, etc. So peer learning. In peer learning, we need to consider first the heterogeneous pairing. So children learn from the more knowledgeable other, and all children have something important to contribute. So mixing students in the groups based on different skills, background knowledge, linguistic ability, it's an advantage. Secondly, we model before pairing. So it's a teacher-student modeling, a student-student modeling also that's guided. We show specific expectations of language and behavior, and we emphasize turn talking, integrated language, and literacy opportunities. And finally, we support the interactions through visual scaffolds, anchor charts, and sentence frames, etc., depending on the age group. So offering cues of what the interaction should look like and sound like, it's important, and this should be developmentally appropriate and linguistically accessible. Here are some examples of the anchor charts for preschool. Musical partners is a specific or concrete way of applying pair learning and play. So we have, for example, music plays and children dance, and then music stops and children high fives a nearby mate, and then children talk, and then the music plays back, and they thank each other and they continue dancing, and the cycle repeats. Another context for this interactive learning is centers and small groups. So it's a place where instructional conversations happen. So these instructional conversations are small group discussions among children and teachers with a learning goal focus. In these centers, you contextualize the topic, you make the topic relevant, you build the background knowledge, and you motivate students to engage with content and use language in their zone of proximal development. So in centers, we can facilitate pairing conversations to join cooperative activities. So the centers give a common subject to talk about, a common goal everyone seeks, like a product. It offers the tools and props that aid this communication. They also foster curiosity and purpose because it engages children as active participants. And finally, the centers offer a low-risk context for participation and asking questions, which is particularly important for bilingual learners. Some examples of centers can be preparing foods or cooking, baking, planting, gardening, collaborative drawing or building, acting out pictures or stories. Now, the centers are not just for children, they are also for teachers. So it's key to have teacher participation in the centers. Teachers' key role at the centers is to guide the conversation by producing language that students can mimic and also to actually try to interact with words of the language of the homes of the students. So if we speak another language, we should use it, or if it's a language that the students speak, or if we don't speak the language, to learn a few words so that we can actually interact. Research has shown that this produces better interactions, and we should always respond to children's communication even if we're not sure of what they're saying. In doing so, the message that we communicate is that diversity and all forms of communication, including gesturing and drawing, are valued, that you're valued, you child, are valued, and then that there are many ways to describe the world, not just one term. So here are some pointers for teacher participation at the centers. Participate for at least 15 minutes. Host students' parents as content and or language and culture experts. Use meaningful objects. Couple an invitation with a question. Contextualize questions and include open-ended questions. Give students the opportunity to respond non-verbally, allowing for concept development and leading to language interest and development. Become researchers to improve sitting and know which group values or practices should be reinforced. And finally, provide ongoing and responsive assistance. These are some of the ways in which we can respond during the centers, by embodying or listening cues. So we lean toward the child, we nod, and we provide eye contact with gesture. So we communicate with the child through movements, especially with our head and our hands. We recast, we repeat what the child said, adding some corrections. We expand, we add to what the child said or did. We mirror, matching the child's gestures. We clarify, we ask the child to expand on his comment or actions, or her comment and actions, etc. So, inquiry thinking as a very important aspect of this interactive learning. We know from Vygotsky that new language offers new knowledge, and that new concepts or new language relate, or both relate and depend from each other, and how vocabulary-rich content leads to new discoveries. We know from studies that children are curious observers of the world around them. So children learn best through discovery-oriented play. So as we expose them to language in connection to concepts, they enjoy the learning, and the learning occurs more effectively. And this happens thanks to the opportunity to explore the language needed for their new discoveries. So it feeds on each other. They feed the language, the new language, and the interest in the language becomes more evident as they become more involved and interested in what they're observing. As they play and interact in centers, their minds are engaged, their hands, their voices. So it's a very constructive approach, which is the core of language learning. This inquiry thinking has, as we know, a cycle. So we observe, explore, and wonder. We have space for questions. And when the teacher participates in the circle, that's one of her main roles, or his main roles. They share what is noticed and questioned. Then there's a deeper exploration through predicting, planning, and organizing. And then additional information is collected through interaction. Finally, construction of new knowledge through teacher support. And then the cycle repeats. So we present potentially eggs, if you don't mind, some dirty centers. And then there's questions, what is this? What happens inside? Who knows? What can we do with this? Why is this important? And then things that we notice about the texture, and then we bring other images, and we do a deeper exploration through prediction. So what's going to happen, etc., leading to new construction of concepts and knowledge and language. So much of our time at school can be based on inquiry, but science is a privilege space for inquiry. So explorations of the natural world captivate and inspire children to engage in receptive and expressive language use. That's why there's some preschools now around the world that are only use the setting of nature outdoors, considering nature to have everything that we need to develop our new understandings. Also, inquiry has to be authentic, so we actually go into real scenarios of the world, like just handling a pumpkin. And the ideal context for language and literacy development is precisely this, where our minds and hands, our curiosity is, they're all engaged in developing new understandings that demand new language. Language is apprehended and it's expanded ongoing in an ongoing basis with these new concepts. Here are some ideas of the scientific process skills. So we observed the questions can be: what do you notice? Ask questions. What questions do you have about it? Describing what happens first, second, and last. What do you notice about this? How did it change? Predicting what do you think will happen next? Provide explanations. I think that, I noticed that. Or using tools to extend the senses and improve observations. What can we use to see it or hear it better? Engaging in what if investigations. What do you think would happen if? What happens if I crack this egg before I put it in incubation, or if I take it out of my refrigerator instead of just taking it straight from the hen into the incubation, etc., etc. So our brains are also visual, and that's why we need to record answers or observations in visual ways: diagrams, charts, drawings, pictures. The more we model how to do this, it will become natural for students' cognitive process to be represented in their heads through these diagrams or organizations, and then they will be able to earn the independence to use them to organize their own thinking. This can happen at a very early age. When I was teaching kindergarten, I remember the students learning the difference between describing and defining, and that's because for describing we would use adjectives in a bubble map, and defining we would use a circle map with a concentric circle with a word. So visuals are extremely valuable when it comes to helping students earn independence in thinking or conceptual organization. So we know that whole child development is much more than academic and language development. It's also culture as a very important aspect of their development, the sociocultural aspect. So we could include cultural objectives along with the content and the language objectives. So for example, if as content objective we would like to students to be able to demonstrate knowledge of the concepts of alike and different through exploration of physical properties. In language, we might have an objective that matches this, like be able to orally express with a partner what is similar and different between two eggs, using the starter sentences: I think they are alike because, or I think they are different because. Our cultural objective could be to be able to contribute to a chart where the class records the similarities between everyone in the group and the similarities between two or more students in the group. And this is important in terms of understanding that we are like all others, that we have many similarities, that we are like some others, but then we're also unique, we're like no other. And the 3 levels of identity are important to affirm, and it's part of the development of our sociocultural competence. Nature offers many opportunities for us to highlight the beauty of these 3 levels of identity affirmation: being like all others, being like some others, and being like no other. So highlighting our uniqueness as an individual and as a group should not be in conflict with highlighting what we have in common with all humanity. This lends itself to our last important theme or concept, which is translanguaging. The context that we talked about, the centers and the peer learning, where the scientific exploration happens, are an ideal place for fluid and dynamic bilingualism and language practices. Also, when we're free to observe, connect, and create in both languages, children's engagement in exploration grows, and with it, their linguistic skills. So it's very important to allow for their holistic repertoire of language to be expressed through gestures or different terms for the different languages that they might learn or know from school or from home. Research indeed supports allowing children to use their entire linguistic repertoire when engaged in inquiry and in innovation. The context discussed during this session allow for this discovery and apprenticeship of both concepts and language. So as bilinguals develop their phonemic awareness, they modify their ideas to match what they constantly learn about each language. Children as young as a year and a half and 2, they start distinguishing between the different phonemic systems of different languages, so they know what term corresponds to each of the languages. So it is also a recursive process rather than a linear one. So they go deeper in their understandings. Therefore, really, as educators, we need to be patient and let them follow this natural process. In these settings, bilinguals learn that there's an arbitrary relationship between objects and labels, that there's many ways of expressing the same object. They also may pay more attention to the abstract aspects of the language, how they sound in general, and they might play with those sounds while they are communicating without necessarily making sense, but in their head they're processing the sounds in correspondence to the language that they hear. And also, bilinguals might have different levels of vocabulary based on context. So they might know all their cooking vocabulary in their home language, for example. And when they are allowed to translanguage, they can show what they really know. Additionally, it's been proven that when teachers use translanguaging, children communicate better between themselves and with others when they're also bilingual learners. So teachers, even when they're not bilinguals, they should make an active effort to learn words in different languages represented in the classroom to foster this communication. I've recorded moments where when the teacher uses a word in the student's language, the students start communicating more even if no one understands them, but the other student tries to communicate back with gestures which they were not attempting prior to the teacher using their language. So these are 4 very important components or context for dual language preschool: peer learning and play, centers and small groups, inquiry thinking, and translanguaging and bilingual development. Components that should not be missing in early education and that we can practice and perfect them as we exercise this passion and love for our students in the preschool classrooms. Thank you very much. Please don't hesitate to contact me if you have any questions or suggestions. And I hope that it was helpful in some way.